Okay, so today we're going to start the Swan project. We're going to do something we've done before where we basically do a wet into wet process. You can see by the reference photo, this is very, very soft, especially the background, super soft. So we're going to wet into wet, and we're going to leave a watermark around, very carefully paint our water around the swan, and then cover our water on the background and over here. And we're going to kind of try to manage this in sections, guys. We're going to try to go from here to about here, and then we'll kind of wash it out, and then we'll kind of start from here to here and continue that first layer of wash over the background. So I'm going to take my brush and start with some clean water and carefully go around the outside of this swan. I'm really just, again, I'm just drawing with the water. Again, the best way to kind of make sure that you're getting everything here, guys, is to tilt your head to the side and look for that sheen on the paper. I'm gonna have a little bit of trouble doing that right now because I have the camera right by my head, so a little weird, but we'll get through it. All right, so you guys just carefully outline this bird with pure water. Make sure the water is good and clean. Now, I got this on a little bit of a tilt, so it's going to be a little bit tricky, but it's my first attempt at a video. All right, so you can see it's gathering a little bit, that water. The gravity here. All right, so I'm going to go from now that I got it outlined, I think I can use a bit of a bigger wash brush. I'm just going to take my 3/4 inch and just kind of put in the rest of that water on the background. I apologize if my head's getting in the shot. I really can't tell. I'm just being careful because I don't want that water to drip into the body of the swan. Again, like as always, guys, keep brushing the water from side to side. We don't want it to pool up on us. That'll create some weird blooming spots, we call them. We don't want that. All right, so the colors we're going to use here are peach, just a touch of peach. Yellow ochre is our predominant color in that background. And we have a little bit of medium yellow as well. All right. And as usual, we don't like dingleberries in our drawings, so get them out of there. If you have a little excess water, again, you can always pull it out with a dry brush or a piece of paper towel. Definitely don't want pooling there. So, all right. So while that's kind of soaking in, I'm going to mix up my colors. Again, I'm using my number 10 brush here. I'm going to use, again, predominantly yellow ochre is my main color. I want a good amount of this because I want to be able to have enough to kind of just, so I'm using yellow ochre, a little bit of medium yellow, and just a touch of that peach, all right? So I want a big batch of this, so when I start painting, I really don't need to do a lot of remixing. I'm going to add quite a bit of water into this mixture because I want a good amount of paint to be able to just tear right through this thing. Again, so this is the kind of situation where we're wet into wet is really perfect because it just aids in the blending of a background like this. This is like classic wet into wet. So again, I'm adding water to this mixture. I want a good batch of it here, so I could pretty much go straight through without having to stop and remix. All right. Now remember, I mean, this looks a little dark, but remember, watercolor paint dries quite a bit lighter, sometimes 35 up to 35% lighter. So what I'm putting down here is actually going to be quite a bit lighter. So I'm just looking at this, and I'm doing a test strip, and that's somewhere in the realm of where I want to be because I want it to end up drying somewhere like that. All right, so and I can always throw a little more water into it to lighten it as I go. All right, so I'm going to start by throwing my water, my nice soupy mix, into the top. So my game plan is going to be to work from the top down and bleed it out. Like for instance, when I get to here, I'm going to add pure water. I'm going to use another brush. I'm going to just bleed it out because you see over here, this area is almost white, right? So I want to really make sure that that's very pale. Same thing over here is a kind of a nice, it's actually fog sitting on the surface of the lake, and so this is quite light here, so I'm going to lighten that up as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to kind of let this go across the top of the page. A nice soupy mix. I'm going to try to control it though. I don't want to go too nuts with having to get drippy on me, right? So as I get closer to the bird, I'll start getting a little more careful. I want to really make sure that I don't cut into that really nice, light, crisp highlight on the edge of the bird. So again, I'm going to let this kind of come down to about here, and then I'm going to wash it out with clean water. All right. One of the tips too, again, remember, sometimes you just got to leave well enough alone. I don't want to fuss with this too much. I'm just going to take a nice clean brush, and I'm going to blend this out. All right, again, being really careful about the head of the bird. I want to keep that very delicate. I mean, one of the key things with this particular piece, guys, is keeping that neck, especially the neck, super thin and delicate. You don't want to get it thicker than it is. That's probably the worst thing that we could do there, is thicken that neck up on the bird. Such a graceful animal. You don't want to thicken up that neck. So you can see I got a really nice soft background here, and I'm just going to let this bleed out to nothing, right? You see I'm working relatively quick. Over here, same thing. We got almost pure white as we reach over here. So I'm going to manage this edge. Remember, having a really specific game plan here. I want to manage this edge, keep it really soft. And now I'm going to start being careful over here to just almost have a super light value here. And again, I'm really paying attention to where the duck is. The duck, I keep saying the duck, the swan. All right, so over here, I just want this to kind of bleed out a little bit, right? Now, as I get down to this bottom edge here, where the duck's sitting in the water, I'm going to let this kind of fade a little bit, all right? I want to just let it fade and bleed out and be super blended. I don't want anything definitive here, all right? And if I see my water gathering, I want to kind of pull it out a little bit, all right? Now, I could probably afford to grab a little bit more paint and throw some in over here. Now remember what I said about water, guys. It always wants to be horizontal. Your strokes have to remain horizontal to have your water be believable. All right, so that's what we want to do. All right, so now I can come down and start doing the same thing on this side. I'm going to keep this going here, right over here. Now you can see how, if you look in your reference photo, in the photo, as it gets over here, the water changes color a little, but I don't really like it, so I'm going to take a little license here and keep it this color and keep it nice and kind of ochre and pretty. You know, I don't want that kind of ugly, fleshy brown color there. I want it to keep it nice and that nice golden ochre color. All right, so now I'm just going to add a little bit more water to the mix. Again, I'm keeping my wits about me when I look at this neck. I want to make sure, even on the reflection of the bird, I want to keep that bird's neck super graceful. All right, so again, I'm keeping my strokes horizontal here. I can even, as I come over here in an area like this, I could pull bits out of that with my clean brush. What I'm doing is I'm dipping it into water, and I could just pull right through that mixture and create a little bit of a ripple. Even if I pull a little bit out, that's great. That's actually my goal. So I'm going to keep this going over here, and I'm going to take a little bit more of that paint. You can see it's starting to get darker as it comes over here again. It's actually kind of getting darker over right about where the bird sits in the water. So I'm going to let this kind of run down. Again, keeping myself aware that I don't want that bird's neck to get thicker than it really is. I would rather keep it thin and graceful. All right, remember, that's one of the classic things about swans is they're so graceful. All right, so we don't want a thick tree trunk like neck there. All right, so same thing over here. I'm just going to kind of let this and you see I got a really nice soft background. Now what I'm going to do, while this is nice and soft and wet, I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to take some water and I'm going to write these bits of light areas in the background are really just the light coming through the trees. So while this is still fairly moist, I'm going to take some water. I'm going to moisten these areas and pull out little bits of light and try to duplicate what's going on there. And you can see it actually works pretty good. Now the key over here, guys, is to try to keep this super soft. We want this whole background area to be diffused and soft and really blended. So I'm just kind of going in circles and I'm almost kind of reactivating the paint and then scrubbing it out a little bit. Now what I can do is I could take a paper towel, keep it in my hands, and as I pull some of that paint out, I can just kind of pull it and wipe it off onto the paper towel, and that works really good. You can see I'm having some success getting that out, which looks really nice. And so I'm going to grab a couple more little spots here. Now, if you have your painting flat on a table, you can literally take a little dot of water and let it sit there for a second, and it'll really activate the paint a lot. And then you can just kind of pull that paint right out. Let it sit for a little bit. And then when you go back to it, you can actually pull the paint out a little easier. So you see I have these really nice diffused light areas poking through the tree now, which is cool. It's the sunlight actually streaming right through that tree, which is great. So I'm going to probably do that again, see if I can get it a little bit lighter. It would be great. What I'm doing is I'm scrubbing it with my brush, with a moist brush, not too wet. And then I'm taking any paint and wiping it into my paper towel like this, so I could actually get it off and don't reapply it. So we have several of these areas here, guys, so you can kind of look at your reference material and try your best to keep that pattern that's going in those trees. It doesn't have to be dead on perfect, but somewhere in the realm it'll look believable. Now if you got to this really quick while the paint was really wet, you could dab it with a paper towel and pull it out as well, and that works really good. I'm going to put a couple more light areas over here. And we got a couple over here too, but I'm going to pull some of them out as well. Now, if we wanted to, we could actually go back and punch this up with opaque white if we really needed to. But I think I'm going to be okay with this. Play with it a little bit. So again, you see I'm activating the paint, scrubbing it a little with my brush, then pulling that paint right off the paper and wiping it off into that paper towel. Actually works really good. And it's really soft and it's believable. It looks like a little bit of light poking through those back trees. All right. All right, so I would have liked it a little better if I had this edge a little softer, but you know, sometimes I can come back in with a wash of white literally and kind of fix that if I need to. I'll see how it goes. Like over here, I think I would like to pull a little bit more of that pigment out and lighten this area, see how that works. See how this works. Sometimes you gotta leave well enough alone, but let's see if I can pull a little bit of this out and soften that edge with that watermark there. I'd rather it be a softer edge. If I can get it softer, great. Sometimes this is a little dangerous going into an area like this. You can actually backfire on you, but let's see if I can pull it off. All right, so what I'm actually doing in theory is I'm reactivating this paint and taking where that edge is, and I'm just kind of pulling the paint down a little further so it doesn't have that edge there. Let's see, now look, looks like it worked a little bit. Lighten a little over here a little bit. All right, so it's starting to look pretty good. I like that. I'm going to pull a little bit more out up here. I'm kind of liking that. Okay, so I might just take a tiny bit and kind of reestablish the edge of this swan's neck. I want to make sure that I keep it delicate and thin. I want to keep my drawing there too. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I like that. All right, so I can come back now. I'm going to add a little bit more color here. Add a little bit more of those ripples and just nothing too specific. Again, if you just your strokes alone will give the visual illusion of a ripple. If you keep it horizontal, then I'm just going to kind of let this bleed up again and wash it out with water. And that's going to be all I'm going to do there. All right. Now I'm going to come back and then I'll start working on the bird in a bit. I'm just going to put a little bit more into here, this area. So it's not pure white. And that's good. I'm going to leave it at that. All right, so I'm happy with that. So any little spots where you see you can correct your drawing. I mean, sometimes I do this a lot. I erase it so much that I can't even see what I drew. But that's good. That's a really nice start for our soft background for the swan. All right. Here again, I'm going to work from light to dark. Always working from light to dark in watercolor. I have a mixture of, if you look it over on my test strip here, I have a little mixture of a little bit of Payne's gray, burnt umber, and yellow ochre. It's kind of like a brownish grayish color, and I'm going to start just laying in a nice light wash where the swan's head is. Again, I'm going to be mindful of the edge light that I really want to retain with pure white paper here. So I'm going to be really careful to make sure that I get this in accurately and I leave enough space for that beautiful edge light to be showing through as pure white. So as I come around to the neck here, again, remember guys, I don't want it to get thicker than it is. I want it to remain graceful, all right? It's a really big part of this. Keeping this bird looking pretty is keeping that neck graceful and thin, all right? So remember, I can come back over this and hit this with some more washes when I need to, all right? I'm going to lay this nice gray-brown mixture in. And again, under here, under the neck, and on the front side of the neck, again, I have that edge light that I really want to do my best to draw that in accurately and leave myself that beautiful white paper, right, really strong, crisp edge light. I'm getting some of these little striations in there too, a little bit of detail. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this kind of wash out a little bit. I'm going to work on the neck for now. So I'm just going to kind of stay over here. I'll let that I'll just kind of bleed it out a little bit so I can keep working on the head and neck for right now. Right, so pull some of this out a little bit. Again, this is probably one of the more delicate things we've done as far as doing a little bit of detail, but we're trying to get you guys to the point where you're kind of ramping it up a little bit, right? So now we're going to start adding a little bit of a darker version of that same color in. I just want to be careful that I don't get too brown. I want to keep it a gray brown. This is a little bit of a tricky mix, so you guys have to play with it a little bit. I'm adding a little bit of Payne's gray back into that mixture, and I want to get it kind of more of a gray, shifting more to gray rather than brown this time. So again, I'm taking this a little on the slow side, guys, so I'm building this up slowly, just using a little tiny bit of color in there, and I'm paying attention again to what's going on in the neck. It's getting a little bit darker, and you can see I'm doing this with transparent washes because I want this to be a really pretty accurate rendition of this swan's neck. Now this again, when we're doing like a little bit of a tighter render on something like that, and again, rendering means just the act of adding light and shadow and detail. When we're doing something a little bit more controlled, and we're adding these transparent washes or glazes, this is the way that we can control it by going from light to dark. So you can see I'm taking it slow, and this is the way I don't kind of jump too far ahead of myself and get an area that's out of control or too dark. So you can see I'm just really taking my time and doing a little bit at a time. And I got a little bit more water in there than I wanted to right there. So I'm just kind of blending out that edge. When you do things like animals with feathers or fur, you can always try to keep your strokes the same as the length of the hair. So for instance, if we were doing like a bear, you would be doing strokes like this in the fur. But these feathers are so small and far away, we don't want to make it look too smooth like a pipe or something. So we're getting a little bit more, it's a little bit of texture in there, nothing too smooth, right? All right, so I want to go a little lighter than my photograph, so because I feel like it's a little bit too dark in the photograph, and that's one of the areas where we'll take a little bit of license, where we can change things to make the painting an improvement on the photograph. Photographs aren't always perfect, so we want to make sure that we use our heads and make really nice choices artistically where we can change things and end up with a really, really nice painting. The paintings are often nicer than the photographs, all right? Not necessarily more realistic, but definitely prettier. All right, so I'm starting to lay that in there. Now I'm gonna let this kind of dry a little. It's a little bit too wet for me to continue, so I'm going to move over to the beak area. I'm going to grab a little bit of this bright red, and I'm going to mix it with the orange. And I'm always going to test it, guys. It's not a brilliant red, so I'm going to grab a little bit of that kind of gray-brown mixture we're using on the Swan, and I'm going to check it out a little bit on my... Actually, that looks pretty decent, so I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there. We've got to be careful. I'm wiping my brush off a little because remember, when you're in really tight, small areas, you don't want a whole lot of paint on the brush because you don't want it to run away from you, right? So, you know, that'll also probably be a quiz question. Like when you're in these tight little areas like this, you can see I'd be in big trouble if my brush was really loaded and full of paint, and especially if it was super watery and loose. I wouldn't be able to control it. It would run away from me, right? So in a situation like this, I definitely want to keep it under control. You know, I don't want too much on that brush, and I probably have a little more than I could have used. So I'm just again, if you do what I just did, where I have a little more paint on there than I want, I can just take my brush and kind of just pull a little bit out, because the last thing I want is it to run away on me, all right? And start making a drip. That would be horrible. And you can see I had a little bit of an accident there, so I'm just going to take some clean water, and while it's wet, I'll just kind of pull that little bump out that I don't want on the end of the beak, all right? And get it back to the shape that it's supposed to be, all right? All right, so now I'm going to add that kind of darker area, which is going to be Payne's gray. It's not pure gray. It's got a little bit of brown in it. So I'm going to put this in, again, guys, not a super watery mix. I'm always going to test it out a little bit. Again, I don't want this running away on me, so I want it to be a little bit drier and not too much paint on there, all right? So I'm just going to look at this really closely and see the shape of my that black area on the goose's goose. I'm calling this thing everything but what it is. It's a swan. All right, so you can see here it is running away a little bit on me because parts of my swan's head are still a little bit wet. So I'm going to kind of just wait on that a little bit. That's not what I want to happen. So if that does happen, guys, just kind of pull back and just let that sit and dry up a little bit, and then we can come back in and play with it a little bit more. I have to kind of pull this out a little bit more. This is a little bit of a tricky area because it's such a small, tiny little head that we have to be really delicate with it. And so now what I'm doing is I'm just using a moist brush, not a wet brush. I'm just kind of controlling where that paint goes. I don't want it to run away and get that dark gray where I don't want it. So I'm just going to pull this up a little bit. It's always better to go a little bit lighter first, and then you can always come back and then darken it up. It's just, again, the reason for that is control. We just want to be able to control what happens with this paint. So with watercolor, always the best result is going to be light to dark. So I'm taking my smallest brush and just adding that little bit of detail in there. All right. I'm going to come back in with my red orange and just lay a little bit more of that in there. Again, it's such a tiny area that we have to be careful that we don't use too much paint. You're better off just kind of underdoing it than overdoing it here, because it's such an important part of the painting. All right, I'm going to kind of let that sit a little bit. What I could do is just kind of take a moist brush, and you see again this whole picture is soft, so I'm just taking a moist brush and kind of tickling those edges a little bit so that black against the light part of the face stays soft. I'll probably come back in and punch that up a little later. Now I'm just checking to see, yeah, I think I can go back on my neck now. I'm going to take a little bit more of that darker gray-blue wash, and I'm going to accent the neck where the shadow's a little deeper. Again, under the chin, I guess under the kind of cheek, I guess what I meant to say is, of that bird. Now you can see this works really nice, just kind of bringing this dark in now that I have a previous wash there. And this is what I meant by going from light to dark with a watercolor. When you want to introduce detail, this is the best way to do it. Now I'm just taking a moist brush and I'm going to blend this out a little bit. Do it again. I wiped it off. And this is just a real nice soft gradation from shadow into the light, right? So we have that beautiful gradation. Wiping my brush off, keeping it moist again, and I'm going to make this edge soft as well as it goes back towards the light. I'm going to add a little bit more dark into the head. Let's get a little more definition. And I'm just blending it out with clean water now. And it's actually starting to look like something now. It's starting to look, it's got a little bit of lighting on it, a little bit of modeling, light and shadow, and it's starting to shape up a little. It's looking nice. So now I'm going to kind of continue back over to the body of the bird and start washing in some of this stuff. Now this gets a little bit grayer than this area here is a little grayer than the neck. The neck's a little browner. So I'm going to go ahead and try to reproduce that color. I got some Payne's Gray on my palette already. I'm going to mix it up, and again I'm going to do really kind of soft, delicate washes of this color, and I'm going to just take my time with it. You can see you got these little bits of kind of folds or bunches of feathers that are kind of almost like bumps on the swan's back, right? So let's just start. Let's start over here and just start laying this in. Now, again, guys, if you want to really take your time on this, like always, this is kind of something if you want to get a little bit of a detail going here, and maybe something a little bit more than you've done before, which is not a bad idea to try. It doesn't mean you always have to do that, but it's a nice place to try going from light to dark. I'm going to start indicating where the shadow shapes go, and I'm going to be kind of nice and careful where the darkest darks go. I'm going to kind of lay them in. I'm not getting too fussy about it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush and just kind of blend it out, because I'm going to do this in stages. There's not that much detail in this painting besides the bird, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my time on it and just kind of Soften all this up. And again, what I'm using is just pure water, not too much, and I'm softening it up, getting myself set up for another layer where I can add a little bit more dark value when I come back in for my second trip here, my second glaze or wash. So you see, I'm approximately in the ballpark of what's going on here. It's not dead on perfect, but I don't really care. That's okay. We're just going to get somewhere in the ballpark of where these darks and lights are going. Now I could take some of that gray and kind of work it in to the neck a little bit, so it's not such a obvious transition, or like such a harsh transition from brownish gray to gray. Just kind of blend it together a little bit more. All right. Now, while I have that kind of wet like that, I could, if I feel like there's a little bit of a lighter value here, I could pull it out with my brush. And that does work really nice. Where the highlight edges are on that, those gatherings of feathers there and the bumps, I can simply just take a little bit of a clean brush and pull some of that out, right? And do it back with the tail. Again, what I'm doing, I'm just kind of dipping my brush into the water and pulling the excess water off. And then just like we did up here, just kind of pulling some of that pigment out a little bit, all right? It's such a small area, it's kind of hard to get too nuts with detail, but again, this mixture is really just Payne's gray, a little bit of that brown in there. So we're going to do several layers of this. Now, while I'm going to kind of let this dry a little bit, I'm going to come and use that same coloring. That's Payne's gray. Again, the body of the bird's a little grayer than the head of the bird, right? So I'm kind of using that same mixture, and I'm going to lay in a wash where the reflection is now. Again, I want to really make sure that I keep my strokes horizontal here. Right? Remember, that's such a big key when you're painting water. It's keeping your strokes horizontal. All right. I got a really nice light reflection on the water there, kind of right through the body of the shadow there. And I really want to kind of capture that, so I'm being careful to where that is. So it's somewhere around here. And I'll leave that little strip nice and clean and white, just the color of the paper. And making sure that my strokes are horizontal. You don't have to do these absolutely flawless, guys. You can just kind of follow the best you can and keep these strokes somewhere in the realm of what's going on with the bird there. Now see, it's now starting to come together kind of nice. I could take some of that dark and come back into the body of the bird and keep accenting these little bits of detail that are in the body And I'm doing, you can see how I'm taking it nice and slow and a little bits at a time. And it, you know, again, I'm putting in a little bit of value with my gray brown paint. And I'm just doing little bits at a time. And then I'm just managing those little areas of detail just by laying in the color and then softening the edges, all right? And, you know, by doing this, it actually comes together relatively quickly, all right? Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to kind of let that, I'm going to soften that, and then I'm going to let it sit for a bit and dry up a little bit. And I'm going to kind of take a look at this area of the reflection of the bird's neck, right? Before I do that, I'm just going to soften some of these reflections in the water. I'm just going to run water over them. And I just don't want them to be cookie cutter crisp. I want those edges to be soft. And again, if I keep what I'm doing here is kind of activating the paint again, making sure that my brush stays horizontal. It doesn't matter if I'm exactly perfect as far as what's going on in the picture. If I do this, we're going to be somewhere in the ballpark, and it should look pretty accurate. So, okay, that's a little nicer. All right. And remember, I can always come back in and do another layer. All right. All right, so I'm looking at the neck of the bird again. I still have a little bit left over. I just want to check. So my neck, my reflection should be the same color as what I did in the on the bird itself. So I'm going to take this paint that I had already sitting there and mixed up. And again, I'm going to keep my eyes on that nice highlight in the water. And I'm just, again, this is all on that reference bit. If you look at your reference material, those strokes, again, those little bits of reflection are all dealing with horizontal strokes in them. So you're better off just kind of using your brush and going back and forth and replicating what's going on in the thing. You don't have to go nuts with detail. If you do this, you're going to bring some of that detail in. Now again, I'm going to play with this edge a little bit. I like that I have some nice light crisp areas here. But over here, I want to just soften this again. Because those little bits of striations in the water are definitely soft. So we can just kind of soften them up with our brush a little bit. Again, I want to soften them, but then I also want to make sure that I keep my strokes in that neck horizontal. That's always going to be a key with water, guys. Keeping your strokes horizontal is just such a big deal. All right, so you can see it's starting to look like something now. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of that color, and I'm going to throw it into the head area of the reflection, and I'm just going to keep I'm paying attention now. Like this, when we get into areas like this where we're talking about this kind of detail, what it comes down to is that, there's a million theories in the world, but it comes down to close inspection. So what are we paying attention to? We're paying attention to the shapes of things, the values of things, and the colors of things, right? So if we hit on those marks, we're going to be in good shape, right? I'm taking some of the brown and I'm letting it come back into the reflection. And that's kind of unifying things, right? Because I'm using the same colors. I don't want, again, I don't want one area to look really brown and one area to look really gray. So I'm kind of unifying it there by putting the colors in both areas. And so that's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to take a little bit more of that kind of brownish mixture. I'm just going to throw a couple little ripples over here. Nothing too distinct. Just going to kind of let them fade out. And one thing I did as well is I kind of left my bottom area all kind of ochre-y. In the actual photograph, this area here is almost pure white. You could do that as well if you wanted to. I thought it was a bit stark, so I just kind of dragged some of that yellow back down in there. I'm just again, I'm kind of throwing some of these ripples in there. Nothing, not crazy detail. Kind of approximating, you know, just approximately somewhere in the realm of what's going on in that picture. All right. So now I can come back into that neck area, and I'm going to throw a little bit more detail over here. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a little more, once that dries, I'm going to throw a little bit of this gray into the neck so this doesn't look so brown and that doesn't look so gray. Right? I mean, we could get away with this. The one thing I'm going to do, though, while this is, I'm waiting for that to dry, is I'm going to take a little more of that Payne's gray. And you can see where the duck, God, I keep calling it a duck, where the swan is sitting in the water, there's definitely a definitive mark, a definitive shadow. So again, I'm going to test my value and color out, and that's a good one. I'm going to use that. And I'm going to define where the swan is sitting in the water. So this will kind of separate the swan from the water itself by accenting that little bit of shadow where it sits. All right. And then I'm going to come back in. I'm going to take a moist brush and just kind of soften that stroke. And on the top, I'm not going to soften it quite as much. I am going to give it a little bit of run through though. All right, so that'll take care of that. And now I'm kind of getting the sense that that swan is literally sitting in that water, which is nice. I think I could kind of bring some of that dark down a little bit further as well, which I'm going to do. And you can see how nice this works, guys, when you do this in layers. When you're trying to control something and get this kind of detail, these layers or washes or glazes put on top of each other just work so good, especially if you're careful and take your time. You can really get some nice detail in there, all right? I'm going to take my Payne's gray, I'm going to punch up that dark in the swan's face a little bit again. Again, this is kind of a drier mix. Always want to use a drier mix when we're doing detail. We don't want that paint running away from us, right? All right, so that's looking pretty good. I think I'll take a little bit more of an accent and throw that right on that line there. A little bit more of a concentration of that Payne's gray. All right, that's nice. The only thing I'm going to do is add a little bit more detail to the body of the swan. There's a little tiny bit. I'm just noticing a teeny bit of blue, like blue-violet in there. I know it's not that easy to see. I'm going to throw some ultramarine blue in here and mix that into my Payne's gray. I'm just going to throw a little bit extra color. into that body. I'm actually going to mix some white into it. So I'm looking for just like a prettier, a lot of times in sunlight, you can see that areas of white that are in shadow are oftentimes blue. They have a blue tint to them. So I'm gonna pick up on that a little bit and throw a little bit of that blue in there and just kind of pretty up some of these areas with color. Again, what I did, same thing as I did before. I'm going to take those areas and then I'm just going to soften the edges with a moist brush. I'm actually pulling a little detail out. I want to lighten this area just a tad. Bringing a little bit of that blue-gray over into the brown area. Again, I want to kind of unify the bird with this color. I don't want anything being too separate as far as the colors go. Kind of accenting this dark shadow under the swan's neck in the reflection. I'm going to throw a couple more accents in those ripples of water. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a dark coming into the front. It's kind of a tricky area of detail in the front of the swan's neck. Now, we could go back in and kind of crisp up the edge of the swan's face with some really opaque white, which is something I think I kind of feel like it needs it. Now, what I'm going to do here, guys, is again, if you're looking at my mix here, it's super dry because this is going to be a real little, it'll probably take a couple layers of accent to get this as crisp as I want it, but you can see I have, it's not a soupy mix. And I'm just going to go ahead and the spots where I feel like I could use a little help with a really punchy area of highlight, especially those edge lights. This is a difficult thing to kind of pull off with just the white of the paper. It's so tiny. So I may do a couple layers of this. Usually it takes 2 or 3 applications to get that edge light when you're using pure white watercolor paint. It takes a couple applications to actually get it opaque enough where you can see it. But it's kind of worth it. It's already looking a little better to me just by doing that. It's the only thing I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to wash a little bit more of that blue over the neck and just kind of unify that bird a little bit more. Or maybe what would even be, yeah, let me try that. Try a little bit of this and let's see how that looks. Again, this is a nice washy bit of that blue. I'm just going to kind of introduce it into the neck of the bird and a little bit on the head and kind of unify the color of the body and the neck. I don't want them being so separate. And then the same thing, I'll probably take a little bit of that brown mixture. Again, a really washy, light layer. And just kind of put a little bit of a glaze or wash over that blue. So just tint it a little tiny bit brown. Again, unifying the color of the bird a little bit more. So we don't have a brown body and a blue, a blue body and blue-gray body and a brown neck. All right, so that's pretty much as far as we're going to go with this one, I think. Again, you could spend a lot of time going back and forth doing a little bit more detail. The only thing I might want to do is add a little bit more of a shadow here on the neck and darken it a little bit, which I might just do. All right, so I'm going to just start punching this up a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast to the Swan. It's looking a little bit light still against that background. I purposely made it lighter, but again, with the theory of light to dark being the ultimate way of controlling this medium, I'm going to start to just punch it up a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more dark in the Swan's neck especially, and just to give it a little bit more contrast. Now for this I'm just using yellow ochre and some Payne's gray. Just kind of testing it out first. Again, it's such a small area that I want to make sure that I'm careful not to overdo it. Just adding a little bit more of a darker value in the area of the head. Again, keeping my mixture relatively dry so I don't have it run away on me in such a small area. I'm just going to take a moist brush and soften this front edge again. A little bit too much water there. Just pulled it out. Now, I also want to add a little bit more of that ochre mixture to the background, just so I can have a little more contrast with the background against the really light edge light of the Swan. So I'm just, I'm going to go punch this up just a little bit. Nothing crazy, but what you can see what's happening is that edge light is now starting to be a little more distinct, and that's going to help separate the Swan from the background, right? And just like always, I'm just kind of bleed this out and let it fade. I want it nice and soft. Now this is actually still a mixture from my first application of the background, so it's kind of, I definitely did myself a favor by mixing up enough. And do the same thing over here. And I got that same kind of edge light on the back of the Swan too, the Swan's back. So I'm just going to kind of punch up that background a little bit, just to give it a little bit more of a darker value, and that again will separate the Swan from the background a little bit, because we have that edge light around the Swan, which is nice and crisp and giving us that sense of a strong sunlight. All right. Now you'll see that the Swan is going to start to pop a little bit more, right? Because the two main things I'm starting to do, adding just a little bit of dark to the neck and the head, and that background. I'm also going to punch up that little bit of that dark mask around the Swan's beak and eye. Again, be really careful, guys, when you do that little tiny area. You don't want a really soupy mix. It's got to be a relatively dry mixture. Otherwise, it'll just run away from you in a blob, and it'll be really annoying. So I'm being really careful. Well, I got that nice dark. I'm going to punch up that separation, that line of separation between the Swan and the water. And that's starting to work for me a little better now. The Swan's starting to separate a little bit more, and that's good. I'm still going to accent the neck just a little bit more. I just want that shadow to be a touch darker under the neck. It's really just a case of being patient, and taking your time when we get into these things where we're doing a little bit more detail. And I think I could probably just throw a little more value into the Swan's body as well. I'm just going to darken it up a little bit. So I'm grabbing Payne's Gray and a little bit of that blue, that ultramarine blue. I'm just going to take a little tiny bit of that brown. I don't want it to be so starkly blue, like so chromatic of a blue. I want it to be a little bit of a brown in there. All right, so here we go. I'm just going to darken it just a tad in a couple spots. You see, all these little things collectively do make a difference. Like, you just take your time. And what we're doing is we're looking at values, right? Shadow shapes. You'll take a little bit of that mixture and throw it into the neck as well. As I'm looking, I could probably close up the width of that edge light there by just kind of bringing that dark a little bit further over, just making a little bit more of a thin edge light. Throw a little bit more of that blue-gray into this neck again, trying to unify this thing with color. Well, the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of the yellow ochre and I'm going to add a little bit of medium yellow to it because it's kind of a glow, kind of a warm glow around the front of the swan's neck. I'm going to see if I can pull that off. So warm it up just a tad. Now the only thing I'm going to darken up is the shadow reflection, or the the reflection of the neck as it lands in the water there. I'm going to take a little bit of burnt sienna, some yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt umber. Now again, I got to be careful not to make this too colorful. And you see what I'm doing here also. I did something really dumb. I splattered all over my painting, so I have to get it out right away. So I'm glad I caught it. So if you do that, just make sure you have a brush handy, clean water, and you see how they're coming right off. If I didn't catch it, it would have been kind of a drag. It would have looked crappy. I would have speckles all over the thing. I had a couple from my previous application that I guess I missed, but just got to be careful not to scrub it too much that you cause one of those little light spots that you didn't mean to cause. That's all. So you can see I'm getting most of them out. Happens. No big deal as long as you know how to handle it. All right, so this is looking pretty good. I think we're almost there. As I look at it, what else can I do? Just darken up that reflection, and of the neck in the water. So I'm going to take, again, where was I? I was taking that brown gray mixture. That looks pretty good. Again, these are transparent washes, meaning they're fairly watery mixture, meaning they're not very opaque and thick. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay this in there and see how I make out. And what I'm also going to try to do is I'm going to leave a couple little lighter areas. I'm not going to cover it completely. I'm just going to let some of those lighter areas show through as if they're kind of ripples in the water, right? I'm just going to take a little bit of a moist brush and then kind of soften some of those spots a little bit. That's feeling pretty good to me. I don't think we need to go much further than that. Only one little spot. Because I'm out of my mind and I just can't leave well enough alone. Just going to darken up the outer edge of this neck a little bit, so get a little bit more of a contrast thing going on there. Yep, that works. Now with just a clean brush, I'm just going to blend that back into the neck, and I think we're good to go. I'll do one little edge light of white, opaque white. See if I can get this worked up enough. I remember when you're trying to add opaque white, guys, it takes several applications. It's just the way it works in the realm of watercolor. If you're using oil paint, you can probably do it in almost one layer. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to squirt out a little bit more white because I don't have enough there. So, putting some clean white out. Again, I'm going to keep this mixture nice and thick because I don't want it to run away on me. Doing that little tiny edge light in the front of the swan's neck, right under the beak there. I just want that edge light to be a little crisper and cleaner. So I'm going to do it like right here. Punch up a couple of these spots. Now I could take it, now that I have this out, I can use this and kind of punch up some of these spots that need a little hit of white. Now that I have it out. A lot of people who are the watercolor purists hate when people use opaque white, but I don't really care what they think. Just throwing a little extra white into the foreground here. See how that works. You're probably not even going to see it when it dries. The white needs usually several applications before it actually is visible. I'll take it. I think we're good.